Are you ready for something just a little bit spooky? I've got 13 book recommendations in this video, all with just a touch of the supernatural. All books that leave you questioning if it even was supernatural at all. I absolutely love these types of stories. They're perfect for if you're too easily spooked for a full horror story, but you like just a touch of otherworldly intrigue. So some of the books on here are scary, some of them aren't scary at all, so I think I've got something for everyone. So let's kick off with a few classics. So the ultimate are the ghosts real or aren't they story has to be Shakespeare's Macbeth. I remember having essay questions set on this at school. So there are a few supernatural elements to this story. The story is set in motion by Macbeth encountering 3 witches, but at the time most of the audience of Shakespeare's plays would probably have believed in witches anyway, so they probably wouldn't have questioned this. But Macbeth is also really influenced throughout the play by seeing the ghost of his friend Banquo, who he had murdered, and no one else in the play can ever see him. So you're left wondering, is the ghost real or just a manifestation of Macbeth's guilt? Now, The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. So this is the least actually supernatural book on this list, but when I asked people for their favourite slightly supernatural books, so many people mentioned this one, so I think it definitely belongs here. It's got this very famous opening where the main character comes across this ghostly seeming woman in white. So it's this really eerie opening which really sets the tone for the rest of this very gothic book, which is set in this creepy mansion and has an evil count as the villain with a wicked plot. Now, getting spookier, the novella The Turn of the Screw by Henry James is about a governess who starts a new job nannying for 2 children and becomes convinced that the house is haunted. And this is another one where there are so many disputes and theories among fans of the books as to whether or not the ghosts are real or just a part of the governess's imagination. And while we're talking about that one, I also wanted to recommend The Turn of the Key, which is a modern retelling of this story by Ruth Ware. So this time it's set in this really modern house where everything is voice activated and controlled by apps, but the underlying story is very similar. A new nanny comes to the house and becomes convinced it is hiding a ghostly secret. Next, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So this is a really good feminist story criticising the terrible treatment of women's mental health in the 19th century. So it follows our protagonist who's been prescribed bed rest, the rest cure by her doctor to cure her hysteria, which we can now maybe interpret as a form of postnatal depression. So she's confined to this one room and forbidden from going out or doing anything. Sounds quite familiar right now, and she's slowly driven to madness. She becomes increasingly convinced that there is a figure creeping around in the yellow wallpaper in her room. She thinks that it's a woman trapped in there who needs freeing. It's really creepy and eerie, and the writer Alan Ryan has a really great quote about it. He said, "It may be a ghost story. Worse yet, it may not." Okay, and one more classic before I move on to more recent books. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It's kind of the ultimate classic haunted house story. So we have a woman called Eleanor who agrees to join this group of paranormal researchers who are investigating this apparently haunted house. So she goes to stay there. Over the next few days they come across mysterious messages scrawled on the walls, a creeping cold feeling, everything you'd expect in a haunted house novel. But the book is actually this kind of deep dive into Eleanor's psychological state, and it leaves it very ambiguous as to whether or not the ghosts are really supernatural. And you may have seen the Netflix adaptation of this book, which was a very loose adaptation. The story is very different, but the show really went hard on that aspect of it. The ghosts in the show were all manifestations of the various mental health traumas of each of the characters. Okay, onto some newer books. So The Upstairs Room by Kate Murray Brown gives me serious Haunting of Hill House vibes, and I loved this one. It's a family drama about this family who move into their dream house only to find, again, mysterious messages scrawled on the wall, a general feeling of unease. It's all very creepy, and the house seems to be making the wife in particular literally physically ill. So we follow the lives of this family plus their lodger and the ways that their lives fall apart ever since moving into the house. But it's left really ambiguous as to whether the house is actually this malevolent force or if it just becomes a scapegoat for their existing issues, and it's really cleverly done. Now, Dead Girls by Abigail Tartellin is a thriller set in the 90s about an 11-year-old girl who sets out to avenge the murder of her best friend. And Abigail Tartellin wrote this book in response to looking at the statistics of violence against women and girls. So it's this really empowering revenge thriller. So it is a thriller rather than a horror, but it does have these supernatural elements. So Thera, who's our main character, is helped along the way by the ghosts lots of other murdered girls who also want to see her get revenge. And I actually did a video with Abigail Tartellin where we talked about feminism in thrillers, so I will link below to that one. Next, The Apartment by S.L. Gray. Now this one absolutely terrified me, so warning, this one is the most actually scary on this list. So this one is about a South African couple who are struggling to rebuild their lives after their house was broken into and they were attacked. So they're really traumatized by this, and they decide to book a luxury getaway to Paris. Only when they get there, the luxury apartment they were expecting doesn't exist, and they're instead in this horrible, rundown, creepy apartment where these increasingly weird things start happening to them. So it's already super eerie. I was reading this one firmly tucked under the covers at this point. But then when they go back home, it seems that whatever evil they encountered in Paris follows them back. So it just gets darker and darker, but it still has that really clever ambiguity where you're not sure which is scarier, if they're actually being haunted or if they're not and it's something much more real. But then onto something not scary at all. So We Were Liars by E. Lockhart is a YA novel that I can't talk too much about without giving anything away. It's got this really great twist that I want you to experience. So all I'm going to say about it is it's about a very privileged but very troubled teenager who has lived through a traumatic event that she has no memories of. And every year she and her extended family go to this private island. So in the book we spend this summer with her there. And I'm just going to leave it at that, but just know it has these strange haunting elements to it, and this is a book you're going to want to discuss over and over with everyone else who's read it. Now the next few books are much less ambiguous about the supernatural element, but they're still just small elements in books that definitely aren't horror. So for example, The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. This is a really sad and moving and powerful book. Warning, it does have a very grim opening where our teenage protagonist is raped and murdered, but she then goes on to narrate the rest of the book as a ghost, watching her family grieve and grow up and move on. So it's really poignant, and it's not a ghost story at all. It's really just a story of life and memory and hope, but just told through this slightly supernatural device. Next, One More Day by Kelly Simmons. So this is another that's more of a family drama, but this time with a mystery at its centre and these supernatural elements. So over a year ago, our main character Carrie's 2-year-old son Ben went missing. She had just left the car for a minute to pay the meter, and when she got back he had been taken. So that was over a year ago, but at the start of this book Ben reappears out of nowhere in his crib. So no one can understand it, they call the police, no one can make sense of this mystery, especially not of the fact that Ben doesn't seem to have aged a day in the 15 months that he's been missing. But even worse, he's only back with them for 24 hours before he vanishes into thin air again. So at this point, Carrie becomes the centre of a lot of suspicion. So the book is really about exploring her journey of healing and her guilt, but with this supernatural mystery at the centre. And then finally, moving totally away from horror at this point, I have Artful by Ali Smith. And this is a very Ali Smith book. It's basically 4 literature talks that she gave at Oxford University, but turned into a ghost story. So our narrator is talking throughout the book to the ghost of her dead lover, who still stays pottering around their apartment, doing things like stealing the TV remote. So it's kind of a mixture of novel and essay. It's a meditation on art and storytelling, but with a ghost. Very much a one-of-a-kind book. So if you do like books that are a little bit spooky, we have a whole playlist of our crime, thriller and horror book recommendations. So do have a browse through, and I'd love to know your recommendations below for these kind of slightly supernatural books. See you next time.